You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast. This week, we're looking at something that it's been kind of just obscured for a lot of people. It's not something people necessarily think about, but they know it goes on.
Yep.
And luckily, one of the titans of the industry recently peeled back the curtain on it, and that is pack cracking math. What is it? Why you need it? How that affects singles prices? Why you as a backpacker need to care?
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Yep. For me, my experience with it was pretty light overall. Working at Troll, we had our little algorithm in place, and our distro was infinite, so the reason we did it was basically the same reason that Star City does it, that Channel Fireball did it, etc., and it was just so we could have quantity. We will talk about the algorithm and all of that ahead of time, but one of the big things that mattered to us, and one of the things I want to talk to you about is, at that point in time, when there were no distro issues, we knew exactly what we were getting. So we actually kind of would work this algorithm in reverse, because we knew how many boxes we were going to get. And from there, we were able to take that information and walk it backwards through the algorithm that we're going to tell you about and say, like, okay, this is what we expect to get for rares, for mythic, commons, uncommons. Foils are a little different. I don't think we're really going to touch on that today, because as we touched on in a much previous episode, somewhere like a year or two ago, rates changed over time.
Yeah.
And that impacts your foil rates a lot. And all this basically allowed us to list stock on the website accordingly and start making our pre-sales.
Yep.
So, all in all, at its core, what is pack cracking math?
So, pack cracking math at its core, like you touched on, basically you take into account the ratios. And if you want to dive into the minutia, we'll have the link to the article that Ben Bleiweiss posted that's, hey, here's what we did for Neon Dynasty.
Call Time is the article on Star City.
Neon
Dynasty, Ben Bleiweiss just lights Watsy up about variant ratios, which is, again, something we'll talk on, but not something we're going to dive into because it's a lot of numbers that you might not really want to care about, like chance to open the yellow and red Hidetsugus.
And so you can do the actual math one of two ways. You can say so what we did at Miniature Market was we said we want to pre-sell 8 of each mythic. How many boxes do we need to order or to open to have 8 of each mythic? And from there, all right, let's go and see what we can do.
Yep.
And then you crack it out, you figure out the ratios, and it's basically like a 2-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1, depending on what era, of rares to mythics.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you figure, all right, if rares are 3-to-1, then out of every 4 packs, I will get 1 mythic. Cool. How many mythics are in the set? It's usually like 18 to 20. Master sets can be different. Times 5 are remastered because, again, variants, things are different. So you can do it that way, and you can say, here's our algorithm. We're going from the solution and working backwards. Or you can say, hey, we don't have infinite allocation as a vendor. I'm only getting 40 cases. If I want a reasonable portion of the set, say I open 40 boxes, what are my odds of ending up with at least 1 of every mythic? And from there, it's, all right, let's get the algorithm. Look at the ratios of rares to mythics to commons to uncommons, assuming no duplicates, and, like you said, cutting out foils. Now, the interesting thing about foils, in my experience with Miniature Market, was we actually didn't pre-order foils at all.
Mm-hmm.
We tabulated them up when we were done cracking. So once you're done cracking your product that you've done your algorithm on, because you don't know, like you may know, hey, I'm going to end up with 500 foil commons. Cool. How many of those are going to be the same common, though?
Yeah.
Will you end up with 1 of every common? Because the insertion ratios on that stuff are significantly harder to algorithm out when it's, I have 1 foil in every 3 packs. I have X odds for a common, X odds for an uncommon, X odds for a rare. And this is, of course, assuming we're not opening collector boosters, which generally are just a bad product to open because their cost is over twice what it is for a set booster or a draft booster. So that was kind of the way I've seen it done is always you either start at the solution and say, I need X amount of each mythic and reverse engineer the equation, accounting for the ratios of rares to mythics. And the reason you do that is because that's your smallest ratio. You don't care about getting all of the commons. You care about getting all of the mythics. Because if you do that, it's a reasonable assumption that you'll get, 20 to 40 of every common. And what a lot of places do is they'll, pre-order similar to Card Kingdom. We're going to gatekeep X amount behind this price.
Yeah.
When those sell, bump it up, gatekeep the next amount. And that's how I've seen the algorithm run before. And again, minutia's in these articles will have it.
Yep.
Didn't want to waste a whole episode on, XYZ times 2, whatever. Algebra has letters. I forget math. That's why I play Magic.
Exactly. And and so up top, what is pack cracking math? It's just any number of algorithms that allow you to solve for whatever you need. Be it,
yep.
I have 40 boxes. What does my mix look like at the end? Or I have infinite distro. I know I'm going to want to sell X number of boxes. So I pull that from my rate. Okay. Now, if I need to open, because I'm pre-selling 12 of each mythic, how many boxes and what am I left with to continue to open over time? That kind of stuff. And that is it at its simplest. This is also why this isn't unique to miniatures market. There are other vendors that don't list foils for that exact reason. You don't know what you're going to get. And while I know pack cracking math for foils does exist, it's not like you can't figure it out. It's just at some point in time, the juice is not worth the squeeze, and you're going to overshoot's the wrong word, but you might end up opening too much product for what you want because you could have sold the rest for more by having left it sealed.
Yeah. And
that also is kind of a per vendor thing. The decision to crack for foils and list. A lot of times you'll see them. You might see 1Xs for a set. Some places still sell complete sets, foil and not, and that is something that you might see. But nobody's going to sit there and list like 24 of the hottest foil mythic, I don't think.
No. And that was actually, thank you for mentioning that, I'd forgotten. Part of our algorithm was also because we had complete sets at Many that we sold. We sold the 1X.
Yep.
We sold a 4X without rares and mythics. We sold a 4X with rares and mythics. So that is also something you have to account for if your business does that in their pack math.
Mm-hmm. So that dovetails beautifully into, why do vendors need this math? And it's so that they can stock, so they can serve their clientele. An LGS may or may not do this. It depends if they want to have either case stock or pre-orders. This is not an end situation necessarily. You can do both if you're large enough. Usually, from what I've seen, it's an or situation. There are stores like Ice Imports that had a TCG player presence and had the TCG player hardware on-prem. So essentially, we would walk in and put your order in on-prem. I think Mox Boarding House has something similar.
Yep.
And it just pulls from effectively their website, at which point you're ordering, from their pre-release or their pre-listing stock, so to speak.
Yeah.
And or from the LGS. But at its core, that's what it is. You have to have product for the new set. This is how you get your product, and you don't want to open necessarily too much product to get there. There's always going to be some wiggle room, but you don't want to go over, because like I said, there are a lot of times where this product will sell for more sealed than it will open, and you want to make sure that you can accommodate that. You also want to make sure you can accommodate busting packs later on as well, if for whatever reason your second or your third shipping wave is lighter than the first, or it's just a banger set and you need more. So,
and that's also important because, when you mention pre-orders specifically, one of the things that a lot of vendors have noticed, it turns out standard cards aren't worth a lot of money, but they sure pre-order for a whole bunch.
Yeah.
How many people paid $50 for Boseiju when it was spoiled? So one of the goals of this is to be able to have those pre-orders so that you can sell them for the inflated price to literally cover your cost. Because if you can cover the cost for 3/4 of your product on literal single sales and pre-orders, well, why wouldn't you do that? Then the rest of those boxes are free.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important aspect of it as well.
Yeah. So this next question is something we've kind of touched on, but I think it is a multifaceted question. So when you're looking at a new set as an LGS, an individual vendor, how do you determine the math or final quantities of packs to open and singles to sell?
So I think that's kind of dovetails with what I just said. It's what is our goal with this, with our quantities?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do we want to do for this stuff? And I think it's all right. If we want to cover 3/4 of our cost for our allocation at launch, okay, we'll determine our algorithm from there. If it's we just want to be able to pre-sell a play set of each mythic, cool, go from there. Or if it's something like, hey, we want X amount of extended art of each card to stock our case with, go from there. So from what I've seen, that is always what is our goal with cracking these packs. Once you have that goal in mind, then it's okay, now we know what we're doing. Now we determine the math. Now we do everything else. And sometimes it's literally just what can you reasonably sell beforehand?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can reasonably sell 20 of each mythic because your website or your business has that captive audience, great, determine that. If you're just doing it as an experiment to see like, hey, let's see, you know, if I can move 8 of each mythic on my, you know, not Pack Fresh Magic TCG player store when I'm just some guy. And it kind of, you know, that's really where it goes, is what can your business load handle? What can your employees handle? What does your store handle?
Yep.
Or if you're just a backpacker, I mean, how many of these boxes am I getting and at what cost? Is it even worth it? Or should I just try to trade them out at whatever TCG low is and just get singles instead? And to me, it's all about what you determine your goal and your math by, all right, or you determine the math and the final quantities by what is my goal with opening this product.
Mm-hmm. I feel like for vendors and large stores, the goal is kind of always the same, and it's to max out quantity.
Yep.
And to capture that pre-release price, the pre-street date price, and you'll see this on individual websites. You'll see it on TCG Player. You know, two different things, or same thing, two different places. And the difference for me always seems to be at the LGS level. Whether you sell on TCG Player or not never really seems to figure into this. I don't know if I've seen an LGS crack for 4X. Or, for that matter, an LGS without a decent web presence crack for pre-orders.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's the same for you. A lot of LGSs around here just crack to have a binder, to have stock of like, here's the commons. You know, we've got it. And it's usually like half a case to a case. Now, there is one vendor here that is one of the national Pokemon vendors that they crack a ton of Pokemon. Mm-hmm. But they have that web presence, even as an LGS, that they know they're going to sell through that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just natural. And I think that's important to note that, you know, if you do have that, yeah, absolutely. Do it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, at the LGS level, it does. It fluctuates, and not just because, you know, do I really want to crack X amount when I can sell it, but also it's no secret LGSs haven't been getting as much product. One of the main LGSs here that I work with used to crack a case of every set. Mm-hmm. Well, for the last 3 years, they've only cracked 3 boxes because they haven't gotten as much because of production issues, shipping issues, COVID,
Amazon,
costs going up by like $12 a piece wholesale, which doesn't sound like a lot, except that $12 wholesale when you're operating on razor thin margins with that amount of overhead actually can make a big difference across a whole year.
Is that when you say $12 a piece? Is that box or case?
Box.
Okay. So 72 a case.
Yeah.
For a standard set.
Yeah. Now it's 84.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's and every time that happens, that's something else that factors into your pack cracking math. What's my cost on this product? What am I paying employees to handle this product?
Yeah.
And that's been kind of, unfortunately, the running theme over the last 6 months of episodes is WotC doesn't care about the LGS, but guess what?
Mm-hmm.
WotC doesn't care.
No. So it really comes down to, what are your goals in your business model, and that kind of puts you down the correct avenue. We mentioned up top individuals or backpackers looking at cracking packs. For something like that, if you wanted to get in as an individual, it's best to have distros. You can get close to distro prices. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it takes some time. But now you're in competition with, regardless of where you're working, unless it is truly local, some large entities.
Yeah.
If you're just competing on the chaff, you have to beat out places like the Gaming Co., who will list hundreds upon hundreds of the same rare. They're cracking for it's got to be close to, rough guesstimation, maybe 20 playsets, 10, maybe 15 to 20 playsets of each mythic, just based on the rares. You can pull a brick, also over 100 of any given rare on pre-release from Gaming Co., no questions. And then large vendors for individual web presence. So it's looking locally, is it financially viable for you to crack these boxes? And then you kind of run into that, like I mentioned earlier, that paradigm of, well, this box is most likely worth more sealed than it is cracked, unless the set is
just gas.
Yeah, exactly. It's just cracked and demands to be opened. But that's why there's a run to the bottom, or it used to be on pre-release weekends and release weekends. People would just race to sell their boxes on Facebook because that was the best way to get rid of them. So,
yep.
As a backpacker, if you can get cases that close to distro, it might absolutely work out to fill your binders, definitely, or move them at above MSRP, quote unquote, and below retail, which is usually 120 or something like that.
Yeah, between 100 and 120.
Yeah. So the last thing we want to touch on, and what might actually be one of the bigger parts of this now, is what determines the pack cracking math and how do variants figure into this. And we've talked about, at its core, pack cracking math is based around opening a certain number of mythics, because that's really what it is. That's your golden ratio, so to speak. And if you're looking at a 2-to-1 ratio of a set that has 20 mythics and 60 rares, and this is coming straight from the Ben Bleiweiss article, these are roughly the numbers that we see now. That's 140 packs. 60 rares plus 60 rares plus 20 mythics, because it's 60 rares and 20 mythics in a set and a 2-to-1 ratio. So to get 20 mythics, it's 120 rares, which means 140 packs. So at its core, that's the math, no additional variables. You mentioned before, you might want to open a certain number of full art cards.
The full arts.
Yeah. Or, alt art stuff. The alternative frames. Any number of variants in a set. These all figure in, correct?
Yeah. I distinctly remember, so the first high variant set, right, was Ikoria, where you had the comic book style art, you had some of the Godzilla stuff, there were all kinds of variants, right? I distinctly remember at Mini we did the math, and we thought we did the math right for variants, but it turns out we were short about 30 boxes because we were short on one variant. And it was literally all of a sudden, okay, well, we went from 370 something to almost 500 boxes that we had to open from the time it was MH1 to Ikoria, because of all these variants that they added. And you factor that into the math. Otherwise, it adds more overhead, because we're not going to sell these variants until we tabulate them all up.
Mm.
Well, the overhead to do the algorithm is way cheaper than the overhead to go through and separate every single alt art from every single card, sort them, straighten them together.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a lot easier to just do the algorithm up front, account for these variants, which hopefully there weren't too many, because, you know, if you have one card that has 3 variants and every other card has 2, that's an extra, you know, flub in the algorithm that all of a sudden we have to do even more math for this stuff now. So it's the variants are very important to that if that's your goal.
Yep.
Again, if you're like, hey, we don't just want 20 of each mythic, we want 10 of each variant mythic as well. So yes, that does absolutely factor into that math, and it compounds far faster than the non-variant version does.
Yep. And I think there's a hidden variable in here, which is the human capital involved.
Yeah.
Because not only... 30 boxes doesn't seem like a lot until you do the math on it. And 30 boxes x 30 packs is... It's not 60. About 1,100 packs. 1080. Snowboarding. And that's a ton of human capital, especially for a smaller... like a smaller operation than a Star City Games. You'll have all hands on deck for as long as is necessary to go through this, and it's shift upon shift of sorting and collating and then pulling for all your pre-orders. Not to mention listing, because you have to ensure that you can't sell it until it's listed.
Yeah.
And I think the human capital is the hidden variable here. All this is upfront to get you where you need to be to sell this product, to make your margins, to make your overhead. Factored into those prices is also going to be the human capital. So at some point in time, you will see the ROI and you will go black on this, but it is going to take some time. You will operate in the red for a fair amount of time while you're essentially prepping all of this to sell.
Yep.
Now, all of this basically stages you to be able to sell a card. And what we didn't expect Ben Bleiweiss to do was not only take the Reddit thread that we were going to reference and turn into an article on Star City Games for us. It was like he was reading our notes. But he also added how Star City prices cards. And of course, he doesn't pull the curtain back fully, but this is how they do it. And they talk about what factors go into that, and we do recommend you give it a read, but it's not something we're really going to touch on here because a lot of it is kind of touchy-feely, so to speak, where it's like, what's the buzz? What are people saying? Are people brewing with it? Is it doing well? And
do we get roasted on Twitter when we post our pre-order price?
Pre-test, like I don't want to call it testing, but like pre-testing when people are essentially creating their own proxies just to test the cards, like. Yep. What's going on with it? There's a lot of subjective stuff in there, and again, great read, just like the Kamigawa thread we're going to link about the variants and what's going on there. But this is why you see Ben kind of championing a lot of this for people. There's a lot that goes into pack cracking math, and he's been getting on Watsy's ass about how many unique SKUs are in this set because his teams need to prep for this stuff to get this all listed. They need to open these packs, so they need to understand what these ratios are so they know how to sell and set up their pre-orders properly. He goes on to tear about Hidetsugu's and the 4 different neon frames and what the rates were there. And like I said, I don't think they pre-ordered any of them. Instead, they just put a 5K price tag on their buy list and competed. They went fishing for that kind of stuff. And this all puts a bow around what was, what is, and what could be when it comes to the secondary market and how you operate as a vendor. And this is one of those things that not a lot of people think about. You know, your LGS might stock a case, but you don't know that they're running pack cracking math behind the scenes to make sure they hit some number. I think my LGS just cracked like 2 to 4 boxes just to have a case presence, like you mentioned. Yeah. There was no real goal besides when Watsy said, okay, here's the street date, you can start busting. They just wanted a presence. They wanted some stuff to sell. instead of just buying
that
from
was
the
it.
players. Yeah. And I think this is something that just kind of falls away and not a lot of people get time to recognize. And I'm sure there's a lot more that people want to know about this at the high level. This is really what it is. There's a lot more to it. Like you said, we'll link the Ben Bleiweiss stuff. But please, if you want to know more about pack cracking and what goes into updating and monitoring this stuff, just come at us on Twitter. We're more than happy to engage with you guys there or in the Discord, because like I said, this is not something that a lot of people talk about besides Ben. So here we are,
Yeah.
celebrating our topic with Ben Bleiweiss, although he doesn't know.
Yeah.
But that's basically the short on pack cracking algorithms. So if you're ready, we can go to picks, and I'll go first.
Let's do
All
it.
right. So I want to say I'm picking another EDH green card, but that's only because it taps for green. And this, it's the World's Tree, so not a lot,
yes.
but it is
Of course.
it is a 5-color card. It's
Yes.
something I've been watching since October of 2021, and it is it looks nice and flat on stocks, which is not the actual case. So I've been holding off on this, waiting for buy lists to increase, and finally got there. And we didn't just get there, boy howdy, we doubled up. So between October and March, Card Kingdom went from buying 147 at $1.80 to 162 at $3.25 4 or 5 days ago, and their buy list is now 173 at $4. So this card is up, 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 and up. The open market is a little different than that. TCG player has been kind of stagnant in terms of price, dropping like a stone in terms of quantity. They had 421 unique prices at 361 market. There are now 282 at a 366 market price. So yeah, fairly drastic drop in overall quantity and a fairly stable price point, which is reflective of the stocks graph. But because of the buy list bump, that's why we're moving in. So when it comes to EDH, what does this card do? Well, it really does one thing, and that's play in 5-color, because it has to. That's the color identity of this card. But it has a little side aspect of a God combo, because you just go fish. So it's you think it's narrow, but not really. As far as the overall format is concerned, though, this is basically Chromatic Lantern and Chromatic Orrery number 2, kind of.
Yep.
It's not usable in 3 or 4 color lists like Chromatic Lantern or Chromatic Orrery are, which is like where they really start to shine. So it's a bit more narrow, yes. This is one of the best color fixers for 5-color decks, however, and it's a bit harder to interact with as land destruction has lessened in time and isn't something a lot of players want to draw ire for. If you want to actually learn about this, I think the last like 4 or 5 MTG Goldfish Commander tier lists mention how Strip Mine has declined in the last couple of years in Commander, unprompted. In the single target removal episode, they talk about Strip Mine. In the best creature episode, they talk about Strip Mine. It is ridiculous, but it is true. So it's essentially it's an essential part to the quote, how do I get this mana to work quote package. Like it just ties the room together. So I expect this to become foundational to 5-color lists in time, and you'll start each list the same, and the World Tree helps ease a ton of your requirements, smoothing draws and increasing playability of otherwise shaky mana bases. The cost to include this in your list is really low, and with a myriad of ways to tutor this up, there aren't many hurdles to clear to ensure that you're able to play it each game. That's probably the best part. 5-color decks are almost always going to be fairly reliant on green for ramp, and there's a lot of green ramp that just says, go get a land. Be from Sylvan Scrying to Reap and Sow, and then you have Expedition Map. Like, it's just not that difficult in high power, low cost ways to go fish for this card. Timeline is a little more interesting. The ebb and flow of interest in 5-color decks seems to be about 9 months. That's the cyclical nature of this. And that's usually when we get one great entry into the pantheon of generals. And if we take a look on EDH Rec, you'll kind of see this. You'll see Essica and you'll see Tiamat. These are from standard sets. and you'll see Joda and Cody, right? These are 5-color cards from standard sets, and in between there is some chaff, like Atog, Cecily, Garth.
Hooray.
Yeah, right? Garth Algarth. So, within the last year, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Forgotten Realms, Strixhaven, and Call Time, the generals I just called out, all had 5-color generals, with Go Shintai of Life's Origin in Kamigawa as the latest element, putting downward pressure on the card and the possibility of another decent 5-color general in any of the upcoming sets. I think our timeline is now about 6 months between buy-in, which is today, and our exit. So, like I said, up at the top, we have this 9-month cycle where we get one really good 5-color general and a couple of duds in between. And 6 months from now would be our exit point, because that'll be just ahead of the next set of sets. So you can just prep to get rid of these. So with supply steadily moving, another Go Shintai or a Morphon or Essica could drastically shorten the timeline. And the reason I call those out is because those are the most popular decks and the most easily accessible 5-color generals that I discussed. Dragon and Tiamat are a little more dicey. AFR was not widely adopted, and Dragon is a commander product card, just like Ramos.
Yeah.
Now, reprint equity on this, I believe, is pretty low, unless it's renamed and makes sense either in a supplemental or a Universes Beyond set, as the World Tree is very much tied to Norse lore. And, like...
Yggdrasil's the thing,
exactly.
Guys. Sorry.
Exactly. As far as buy quantity is concerned, 5-color lists are the only home for this, and it's not the most popular option in EDH, so I wouldn't go incredibly deep if you do plan to trade these out. For that trading, I would recommend getting 2 sets at most, because you only need 1. If you have a heavy 5-color meta or plan to exit the buy list based on steady numbers on buy lists like we're seeing, I would go as deep as you feel comfortable. Like Chromatic Lantern, really the sky's the limit, and with lower reprint equity, sitting on a brick seems like a fine play, but I would keep an eye on them and look to make profit ASAP. So I just keep re-upping and not re-upping, reviewing buy lists and seeing where we are. Personally, I have I think at this point 2 or 3 sets of these, and I got them almost all at release. No more, because nobody's moving them locally. So that's where I stand on this card. I didn't really need to pick up any on TCG Player in the interim, but I think now is the perfect time to do that.
Yeah. I think this is incredibly solid. And like you said, the fact that it is so closely tied to Norse mythology, that reprint equity is so important. Mm-hmm. Because, all right, so if they do it in the Universes Beyond set, there's nothing like that in Lord of the Rings, and there's certainly nothing like it in Warhammer. No. So for this year, there's not really a reprint unless it's in Commander Legends 2? Who knows? I wouldn't think so, though, because that doesn't seem like a...
Which is tied to D&D, isn't it? It's Commander Legends
Baldur's Gate. Exactly. It's tied to D&D.
Yeah.
So why... There's nothing there. Like, there's no world tree in D&D lore, especially not Forgotten Realms.
It's not even Forgotten Realms. It's Baldur's Gate in particular.
Fair,
it's that supplemental.
And there's definitely nothing like that in Baldur's Gate.
And I'm glad you touched on the reprint equity, because that's how people got hoisted, quote-unquote, on Chromatic Lantern. It's gone back up, but that is what mushed the people who are sitting on Chromatic Lantern. It just took a little more time to exit. But... it is the reprint equity that makes this card really interesting. It's difficult to put into supplemental, too, because that means you have to accommodate it with a 5-color anything. I mean, you had Essica in Call Time, so it kind of made sense. You had the gods, so you could go fish. It's not like you're doing that unlimited, but it all played well together. I think if it was going to happen, the other place it could be would be in Dominaria, a trip back there.
Sure.
Yeah, if they renamed it and put it somewhere in Dominaria, because you do have not a lot, but you have like Chromat and...
Yeah, there's a decent amount of 5-color lore.
Yeah, exactly.
Behind it.
Yep.
The other thing I like about this card is that the fact that it pairs with a very powerful common creature type. Because it's not just the Theros gods, it's not just your Kaldheim gods. You have the Locust god, Scarab god, Scorpion god. You have gods throughout Magic, and it's the kind of thing that the more we go to these, not necessarily like religious sets or whatever, but these like theistic sets. And you know what Dungeons and Dragons sure has a lot of, some of which were present in Baldur's Gate? gods. So who knows? Maybe we get one god that's just busted in half alongside Perforos one day, and suddenly this card can skyrocket because there's a random 2-card combo that you don't need to ban an EDH because you can just have a conversation about it before your game and decide that it's okay to play it.
And you don't need to rely on Masquid Nexus as well. We keep getting more god. Like, I don't want to say prior to this, but Masquid Nexus was also in call time. Like, you don't. There's just so many. You just build that deck, and that's how it goes. That's the flow of that deck. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Solid. I like it. All right. I am taking a page out of your book, and my pick this week is a green EDH card. Specifically, Abundance from Urza's Saga. So, to start with, I've loved this card for a long time. Its synergies with Sylvan Library are great because you just get to recall every turn and not put anything back. What's interesting to me is that this card has been reprinted multiple times. So Urza Saga comes out. We've had a reprint in Dual Decks, Nissa versus Obnixilis, Commander 17, 10th edition, and then in the Zendikar Rising decks. Now, what's incredibly interesting about that is it wasn't until after the reprint in November of last year that all of a sudden this card sees a surge up to $10. Now, every printing mirrored this. Every printing, went between $5 to $6 to $10. What's been interesting is that we've reached the valley since. We've set our new floor. And the Urza Saga one is about 3 times the price that it was before. Its floor was at $1.48 for literal years, basically. And now our floor seems to be at $5 and has been for months. I'd say that's a reliable floor. On the other hand, all of our other reprints have a new floor that is still less than $1, just slightly less than $1 instead of significantly less, excepting 10th edition. What this tells me is that there is a desire specifically for the old border version of this card, for the original Urza Saga, flat green version of the card. Now, listing-wise, this is something that over the last couple months, quantities fluctuated a lot on TCG Player. We're overall only down about 10% across all listings, all sets, whatever. But we're down about 15% on the Saga listings, so we're starting to see a little bit of stock dry up. So why is this card playable? Well, if you take a look at EDH Rec, it's kind of interesting. It's funny that we talked about LD and how people don't like LD, because a lot of the cards that it synergizes with, commander-wise, are lands matter commanders. It's something that I specifically run in an LD deck so that I can get my lands to recover faster. It is something that synergizes with any draw spell. One of the top commanders is Chulane. Chulane likes to draw cards and play lands. You know what Wizards of the Coast loves doing lately? Pairing green and blue together, which draw cards and play lands. As far as timeline goes, this is one I'm a little bit less certain on. This is good. I would see this as a long haul type of card. I wouldn't go more than, similar to you, about 2 play sets deep. It's an EDH card. Nobody's playing a 4 mana cost card in Legacy. No one's playing it in Modern, and it's Modern legal. I don't think the game slows down enough for that to happen. So, but what I'd be looking at, just from a natural appreciation and drying up of quantity on this, is basically about a year plus, which isn't spectacular, obviously. We'd like a quicker turnaround, but that's also why I'm saying only get a couple of play sets. I would say pick it up in trades if you can. Pick it up in rare binders. Pick it up in places that may not necessarily, know they have the card, rather than just straight stock it off TCG Player. Your out for this is probably going to be trades. Now, reprint equity, we did just get it in Zendikar Rising. It was in the Lands Matter deck. So I don't think we get it anytime soon. I don't think. But we could. I could see something like this happening on Dominaria, which again, the slight uncertainty of reprint equity is another factor in me saying don't go too terribly deep on this. I have like 16 of this card because this is a card I love. I throw it in every trade minder I have, hoping that one or two of them move because someone's like, I didn't know this card even existed. I need this for some filthy casual EDH deck. I'll trade you for it. So I'm saying don't do what I did. Go lower. It's also the kind of effect that, honestly, we don't have anything like this in Magic, except for Abundant Impulse, I think it was. It was the green sorcery for 1 green that was this for the next card you draw. There's no effect in green like this for filtering your
Abundant
draws.
Harvest?
It is complete. Yes, Abundant Harvest, that's the one. There's no effect like this. This is unique, and it's not the kind of effect that, templating-wise, you'll ever see in another standard set. There's a reason that since 10th edition, it's only been printed in supplemental product, which, if production continues the way it is probably not going to be enough to have a huge, meaningful impact on the price of this card. This is also a card that, to me, seems like it's very Invisibles appealing. This is, whatever I need, I'll be able to get it. I'm going to put it in my deck without realizing that you don't need Sol Ring on turn 7 every time, but there it is, type of deal. And I think that's another factor that may play into offloading this card. If you have some casual players, hey, have you heard about this card? I see you're playing green. You should play this card. It helps out. So overall, I think it's solid. Full disclosure, not going super deep. This is going to be a longer term hold. If you're looking for more of a quick flip, this is not your guy. This is, park it in a penny sleeve with 4 to 8, throw it in a box, forget about it, check on it in a year. My Sarkhan's Unsealings have still not panned out 600 plus copies later, but we'll see.
No, Abundance is such an interesting card because it seems like when you look at Brack, and I'll bring it back up, and all the generals on here, I've seen the majority of them played in some way, shape, or form, either at tables or in Commander content, and either nobody draws the Abundance or nobody plays the Abundance. So it definitely has an invisible appeal, but it's just, I don't know if it's because truly people just don't know about it and thus don't know about it, or the content creators that could help bring light to this card aren't drawing it, so nobody gets to see what it does, so it stays unknown.
It's really interesting because it's been around forever, and it was just reprinted in a popular Commander set, but that's the only reprint since 2017, which was a fine Commander product, but it's no secret that the marketing, like the reach of the brand since 2017 has exploded.
Oh, absolutely.
I wouldn't be surprised if 2/3 of players that have started, in the last 10 years don't know about the 2017 reprint because they started after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
it really does sneak by. It's in 14,000 decks on Rec. You'd think it would be just more... more visible seems still like the wrong word to use here. I just don't... I don't get it. I don't...
Yeah, it's just... It is an Invisibles card.
Yeah. It truly is. It's not Sylvan Library. It's like a weird patched Sylvan Library, and maybe that's what... that's the marks against it, is that it doesn't do what the old one did, and thus people kind of forgot about it or set it aside, or they look at Abundant Harvest and they say, well, I'd rather just pay the 1 for the one-time effect as opposed to 4. But yeah, absolutely, I think pulling up on a handful of the Saga version is the right way to go. And the other thing is interesting. So they never changed the art on this card.
Nope.
It has the same Rebecca Guay art across all 5 printings, despite the fact that they changed the frame every time.
Yeah.
And to your point, the Saga one, that deep green frame, complements the Rebecca Guay art very, very well, and the 10th edition is all right because it's a darker green than the rest of the frames. Not the flat green that it used to be, but still decent. And I think that might play into it as well, as that there's also that aesthetic of the art never changes. It was built for a very specific frame and color palette, And when you shift that color palette, it becomes a little bit of an eyesore. So Rebecca Guay is a favorite artist of a lot of people, and
Yep.
it also has that little bit of curb appeal to it. So overall, I think this is great. I would assume in time people will pick up on it because, as we've said in the last, I don't know, episode or two, they're not making worse cards with ETB effects, and landfall triggers and landfall style effects seem to be kind of a de facto right now. So
Yeah.
anything that helps power that up is, I don't,
Good.
yeah, exactly, not where you want to be, but definitely good.
Yeah.
And this is agreed something to just sit on. It seems very, very easy to just pick up a set and squirrel it away. Yeah. I can't see why you wouldn't be able to move this in trade unless you just don't have that landfall player locally, which definitely could be a thing. So
That's fair.
there's that. But otherwise, yeah, pick it up and sit on it. Perfect. But I think that's going to be it for this week, everyone. Next week we'll be back to discuss Star City Indy, which is the second Star City event of their circuit.
Yes.
Right. Dallas being the one after that, and talk to you a little bit about the goings-ons there, because I know we have been kind of light on that, and maybe we can get a little bit of comparative analysis to TCGCon, because that circuit is still pumping, although right now it seems to be a little bit below water. People just kind of forgot about it since Star City's running events.
Yeah.
So, until next week, we are at MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube. You can find the audio version of our podcast anywhere you can find podcasts. The videos are up on our channel on YouTube. I am at Halt I Am Reptar on Twitter. You are
At Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.